What if the next chapter of Yellowstone doesn't begin with a gunshot, but with silence? A silence that tells us the ranch has already paid a terrible price before the story even starts. 21 years have passed, and the world is no longer the one we left behind. The old generation is fading into history, a new generation is ready to carry the Dutton name, and a global war is about to test every promise ever made on that land. But the biggest question isn't who survived, it's whether the Yellowstone legacy can survive the people who inherit it. If 1944 truly becomes the next Yellowstone prequel, it could completely change everything we thought we knew about the Dutton family. So let's break down what this first look could be setting up, because there are already several clues pointing toward a much bigger story than most fans realize. One thing that immediately makes Yellowstone 1944 so exciting is the timeline itself. This series would not simply continue where 1923 ended. Instead, it would throw us more than 2 decades into the future, skipping over years filled with victories, heartbreak, births, funerals, and countless untold stories. That kind of time jump creates endless possibilities because viewers won't be watching characters slowly become legends. They'll meet them after life has already changed them. Think about how different the Yellowstone Ranch could feel by 1944. The fences may still stand, but the people walking those fields won't be the same ones we remember. Every decision made in 1883 and 1923 has been building toward this moment. The ranch has survived harsh winters, financial struggles, violent enemies, and family tragedies. But now it faces something even larger. The entire world is at war, and no family, no matter how isolated, can completely escape the effects of World War II. That alone could give this series a very different atmosphere from previous Yellowstone prequels. Instead of focusing only on protecting land from nearby rivals, the Duttons may also struggle with events happening thousands of miles away. Young family members could feel the responsibility to serve their country, while those remaining on the ranch must somehow keep everything together without them. Every letter arriving at the house could bring hope or heartbreak. Every knock on the front door could change someone's life forever. Another fascinating part of this possible story is how much family history may already exist before the first episode even begins. In earlier Yellowstone stories, we spent a lot of time watching relationships grow. We watched people meet, fall in love, build trust, and dream about the future. But 1944 may decide to skip all of that. Instead, viewers could arrive at a ranch where children have already grown up, marriages have already been tested, and new responsibilities have already shaped every member of the family. That approach would instantly make the story feel more mature. Rather than asking whether 2 characters will eventually fall in love, the bigger question becomes whether an entire family can stay united while history pushes them in different directions. Sometimes protecting a legacy is far more difficult than creating one, and this era may finally show just how heavy that responsibility truly is. Of course, one of the biggest mysteries involves the next generation of Duttons. Fans have spent years trying to connect every branch of the family tree, and 1944 could finally answer some of those questions. We may meet characters who have only been mentioned in passing before, people whose choices eventually shape the future seen in the original Yellowstone series. Even small conversations could suddenly become important because they help explain how the family eventually becomes what we already know decades later. The ranch itself might also reflect those changes. Years of hard work would likely make it larger and more established than ever before. New barns may have been built. Old buildings may have disappeared. Familiar places could now carry memories that newer generations barely understand. Every corner of the property would remind the audience that time never stands still, even for a family that fights so hard to preserve tradition. Then there is the emotional weight carried by those who survived the earlier stories. Anyone still living has experienced decades of loss, sacrifice, and responsibility. Those experiences would naturally shape how they raise the younger generation. Instead of teaching children only how to ride horses or work cattle, they may spend just as much time teaching them why the ranch matters in the first place. After everything their family has endured, protecting Yellowstone is no longer just about owning land. It has become a promise passed from one generation to the next. That is exactly why this possible series has so much potential. The greatest conflict may not come from outside enemies at first. It may come from the pressure every young Dutton feels as they realize they are expected to carry a legacy built through decades of sacrifice. Some will embrace that responsibility. others may question it, and those different beliefs could quietly plant the seeds for conflicts that shape the future of the entire Yellowstone universe. If the first trailer is designed to introduce this new era, it doesn't need to reveal every major twist. It only needs to remind viewers that history is moving forward, whether the Dutton family is ready or not. The world outside the ranch is changing faster than ever, and the people inside the ranch will have to decide whether they change with it or fight to preserve everything their family has built. That single choice could define the entire story from beginning to end. Sect 1 of the biggest questions surrounding Yellowstone. 1944 is which familiar faces will still be part of the story. After a 21-year time jump, the family tree looks very different, and that means the emotional center of the series could shift in ways that no previous Yellowstone show has explored. Instead of watching older characters lead every major decision, we may finally see the younger generation step into roles they have been preparing for their entire lives. Of course, the first name everyone thinks about is Spencer Dutton. By the time 1944 begins, Spencer would no longer be the adventurous young man who traveled across continents hunting dangerous animals. Those years would be behind him. Instead, he would likely be an experienced rancher, carrying decades of responsibility on his shoulders. Life has probably taught him lessons that even his wild adventures never could. The fearless hunter may still exist beneath the surface, but now every decision would be made with an entire family depending on him. That change alone could make Spencer one of the most interesting characters in the Yellowstone universe. We already know he survived well beyond the events of 1923, but survival does not mean life became easy. In fact, the years between those stories may have been filled with challenges we have never even imagined. Running the largest ranch in Montana while raising a family during one of the most uncertain periods in history would test anyone, no matter how strong they are. Then there is Alex. If she returns alongside Spencer, viewers would meet a woman who has spent more than 2 decades building a life on the ranch. She would no longer be adjusting to Montana. She would be part of it. Everything she fought for during 1923 would finally have become reality. But that does not mean her struggles are over. As the world enters another major conflict, Alex could once again find herself wondering whether peace ever truly lasts for the Dutton family. What makes this especially interesting is that Spencer and Alex may now have adult children. Rather than focusing on their own romance, the story could revolve around watching them become parents, trying to guide the next generation through impossible decisions. That creates an entirely different kind of drama. The danger is no longer just directed at them, it is directed at the people they love most. Many fans also continue discussing Elizabeth. Her future remains one of the greatest mysteries left by 1923. When she walked away from the ranch, her decision made perfect sense given everything she had endured. But 21 years is a very long time. People change, priorities change. Sometimes the place someone tries hardest to leave behind becomes the place they eventually miss the most. That is why I would not be surprised if Elizabeth returns in 1944. But if she does, she should not come back as the same person. She would have lived an entirely different life away from the Yellowstone Ranch. Those experiences could make her stronger, wiser, and far more independent than before. Instead of returning because she needs help, perhaps she returns because the family needs her. If Jack's legacy continues through their child, Elizabeth's return becomes even more meaningful. She would represent a bridge between 2 generations of Dutton history. Her child could now be fully grown, carrying both the pain of losing a father and the responsibility of continuing his family line. That emotional combination has the potential to create one of the strongest storylines in the entire series. Another character whose absence may speak louder than any appearance is Cara Dutton. Realistically, by 1944, both Cara and Jacob would almost certainly have passed away. Their influence, however, would still be felt everywhere. The ranch they protected would still exist because of the sacrifices they made years earlier. Every important decision made by the younger generation could reflect lessons they learned from Cara and Jacob long before the story begins. I also believe the series could continue using Elsa's narration. Even though her own story ended years before these events, her voice has become one of the defining features of the Yellowstone prequels. She connects every generation, reminding viewers that this is not simply a story about one family. It is a story about legacy, sacrifice, and the passage of time. Imagine the opening moments beginning with Elsa reflecting on how every generation believes its greatest battle is the last, only to discover another challenge waiting beyond the horizon. That simple idea perfectly captures the spirit of the Dutton family. No matter how much they sacrifice, protecting Yellowstone is never truly finished. The most fascinating part is that every new generation believes they understand what their parents experienced, but they rarely do. The young adults living in 1944 would inherit the ranch without fully understanding every sacrifice that built it. Only when they face their own impossible choices will they finally realize why earlier generations fought so hard to protect the land. And perhaps that is exactly what this series is really about. It is not simply introducing new characters, it is showing how responsibility passes from one generation to another. Every parent eventually becomes the storyteller, every child eventually becomes the protector, and every generation leaves behind a legacy that the next one must either preserve or risk losing forever. If Yellowstone 1944 embraces that idea, it could become one of the most emotional chapters in the entire franchise. As exciting as returning characters would be, I honestly think the biggest strength of Yellowstone 1944 could be the brand new generation. This is where the story has the chance to surprise everyone. Instead of relying only on familiar names, the series could introduce young Duttons who have grown up hearing stories about legendary family members, but now have to prove themselves in a completely different world. By 1944, the children born during or shortly after the events of 1923 would now be adults. They would have spent their entire lives on the Yellowstone Ranch, learning every lesson their parents and grandparents could teach them. They would know how to ride, work cattle, survive harsh winters, and defend their family's land. But the challenges waiting for them may be nothing like the ones previous generations faced. The biggest reason is simple. The world itself has changed. Unlike earlier generations, these young men and women would grow up during a time when technology, transportation, and communication were advancing faster than ever. News from across the world could reach Montana much more quickly than before. The ranch would no longer feel completely isolated from global events. Every headline about World War II could directly affect the Dutton family, whether through military service, shortages, or the uncertainty that comes with living during wartime. That creates an entirely different kind of pressure. Imagine a young Dutton who dreams of protecting the ranch, but also feels a duty to serve overseas. No matter which choice he makes, someone will be disappointed. If he leaves, the ranch loses another strong pair of hands. If he stays, he may spend years wondering whether he abandoned a greater responsibility. That kind of emotional conflict feels perfectly suited for the Yellowstone universe because there is no easy answer. Another possibility that I find incredibly interesting is the idea that not every member of the younger generation sees the ranch the same way. Previous shows often reminded us that the Yellowstone means something different to every person who lives there. For some, it is home. For others, it is a duty. And for a few, it can even feel like a burden. That difference in perspective could become one of the main sources of tension throughout the series. One sibling may believe the family's future depends on holding on to every acre of land, no matter the cost. Another may wonder whether decades of sacrifice are worth repeating forever. Neither side would necessarily be right or wrong. They would simply be looking at the same legacy through different eyes. I actually hope the writers avoid creating a simple hero and villain dynamic within the family. The most compelling Yellowstone conflicts have always come from characters who believe they are doing the right thing. When every decision carries consequences, the audience naturally understands both sides. That makes every disagreement feel far more emotional because nobody wants to see the family divided, yet everyone understands why it happens. There is also another mystery that could finally receive attention. We still know surprisingly little about several important branches of the Dutton family tree. 1944 has the perfect opportunity to introduce characters who quietly fill those missing gaps without making it feel forced. Instead of delivering long explanations, the show could simply allow viewers to spend time with these characters and gradually understand how they fit into the larger Yellowstone timeline. One character I'm especially curious about is Spencer's younger child. Depending on how the timeline unfolds, this son could still be finding his place within the family, while an older sibling has already earned everyone's respect. Living in that shadow would not be easy. every accomplishment could be compared to someone else, and every mistake might feel even bigger because of the expectations attached to the Dutton name. That kind of insecurity does not automatically create a villain. In fact, I hope it doesn't. Instead, it could create one of the most relatable characters in the series. Someone who loves the ranch just as much as everyone else, but constantly wonders whether they truly belong there. Those quiet internal struggles often create the strongest emotional moments because they reflect challenges many people experience in their own lives. Outside forces could also recognize that uncertainty. Rival landowners, ambitious businessmen, or political figures may see an opportunity to exploit those family divisions. Rather than attacking the ranch directly, they might attempt to weaken it from within by encouraging doubt and mistrust. That approach would feel much more realistic than introducing another enemy who simply wants the land for obvious reasons. Meanwhile, the older generation would likely recognize those warning signs immediately. After spending decades protecting Yellowstone, they would understand that the greatest threats are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes a family begins to fall apart through small disagreements, quiet resentment, and decisions that seem harmless at first, but eventually grow into something much larger. That is exactly why 1944 has so much storytelling potential. It is not only about expanding the Yellowstone timeline, it is about exploring what happens when a legacy becomes so large that every new generation struggles to live up to it. Carrying the Dutton name has never been easy, but by this point, it may feel heavier than ever before. Every choice matters, every mistake lasts, and every sacrifice shapes the future that later generations will inherit. If the series captures that emotional weight while introducing memorable new characters, then Yellowstone 1944 could become much more than another prequel. It could become the chapter that finally connects the past to the future, showing exactly how one family's decisions during one of history's most difficult periods helped shape everything that comes later. While the story itself is full of possibilities, one question continues to come up among Yellowstone fans. When will 1944 actually begin production? Over the past several months, there have been plenty of rumors, but very little official information. That uncertainty has only made fans even more eager to learn what the future of the Yellowstone universe looks like. The good news is that the project still appears to be moving forward. Although Paramount has remained quiet about many details, multiple industry reports have suggested that 1944 continues to be part of the long-term plan for expanding the Yellowstone franchise. That should be encouraging for fans because it means the idea has not disappeared. Instead, it seems the creative team is taking its time before officially introducing the next generation of the Dutton family. And honestly, that may be the smartest decision they can make. A series built around a 21-year time jump cannot afford to rush its casting or its story. Every major character has to feel believable from the very first episode. These aren't completely new people. They are older versions of families viewers have already spent years following. Their personalities, their values, and even the way they speak should naturally reflect everything that happened before. Casting will probably become one of the biggest challenges. The actors chosen for the next generation won't simply need to look like members of the Dutton family. They'll need to carry the same emotional presence that made previous characters so memorable. Fans immediately recognize authenticity in the Yellowstone universe. If someone feels out of place, audiences notice it right away. That is why speculation about potential casting has become so popular online. Every week, fans continue suggesting actors they believe could step into these important roles. Some names seem more realistic than others, but it shows just how invested people already are in a series that hasn't even released a trailer yet.